fan is on, I am sweating, I have 2 styes in my eyes, and no makeup on. I think we're ready to go. Welcome to Chiller Thriller. My name is Riley, and I'm here to hold your hand as we walk through horror movies together if you find yourself interested in the genre, but maybe a bit too scared to check out a movie all on your own. There's no judgment here. I got you. Today, we are talking about John Krasinski's incredibly successful feature film, A Quiet Place. We have been waiting a long time for A Quiet Place 2, and now that we are finally getting it this week, I wanted to take a look back where it all started. This was another very memorable movie-going experience for me, because if you're not familiar with the movie at all, it takes place in this post-apocalyptic world overrun by monsters that hunt people down if they make any sound at all. So a lot of the movie takes place in almost complete silence, as long as you had a cooperative audience, but that's a whole other thing. Another thing that I think is really exciting about A Quiet Place is that it's a really big win for PG-13 horror. I think a lot of people get disappointed when a new horror movie is coming out and it doesn't have an R rating, because they just want all the hardcore, gory, scary stuff. But I think A Quiet Place is a wonderful example of a PG-13 horror movie that is still scary as hell. And some of those scares are jump scares. Now, if you're like me, the anticipation of a jump scare can be worse than the actual scare itself. So allow me to roll all the timestamps for the jump scares in A Quiet Place here so you can properly prepare yourself. Now, perhaps due to its PG-13 nature, besides the jump scares, there's not a whole lot I feel like I have to warn you about before you dive into this movie. So this is one I really recommend you check out on your own. If you've somehow avoided it and know nothing about it, if you think you're up to it, I think you'll really enjoy it. But for those of you who want to be cautious, I'll roll all those other timestamps for upsetting stuff here. Now, welcome to Spoiler Town. This was the first time I have revisited this movie mid-pandemic, and I gotta say, these post-apocalyptic movies really hit different now. Right away, we start things off on day 89, which is something I love. I love that we are thrust right into the middle of this situation. We're about 3 months into whatever world-changing event has happened, and we're playing catch-up with these characters who are mostly situated to this new way of living. I always prefer having to pay attention and sort of suss stuff out for myself, rather than have everything completely spoon-fed to me. I just think it's more fun, and it makes me feel smart. For example, we see a family walking around barefoot and being very quiet. We can also see that one of the children is sick, and we can tell that they are searching through this drugstore for medicine of some kind. Boom! Perfect setup. We've got stakes and we've got danger in the first 30 seconds of movie. So let's meet our main characters, and quite frankly, I did not know their names until I looked at the IMDb page because I really don't think it comes up at all. We have director John Krasinski and his real-life wife, Emily Blunt, playing Lee and Evelyn, who are the parents of 3 children, Reagan, Marcus, and Beau. The family communicates in ASL for 2 reasons, one being that the monsters use sound to hunt, and secondly because Reagan is deaf. Because of this, we get a lot of great examples of what is bound to be the first piece of advice you'll hear in any fiction writing class, which is show, don't tell. They don't need to say to us, if they make a sound, big monsters will find them and eat them and kill them, because while we may not know the specifics of the situation at this point, we can understand through the setting and the intensity of the performances that for whatever reason, they need to be quiet. There is a great false alarm scare where it seems like this rocket that the youngest son, Beau, found is going to crash to the ground, but we get a last minute save from Reagan, and those kinds of fake out scares are something A Quiet Place is chock full of. Beau still really wants that rocket though, even though everyone looks at him like he is holding a ticking bomb. His father quickly removes the batteries and explains to him that it's too loud so they can't bring it home with them. But Reagan, being a cool older sister, gives the rocket back to him without the batteries in it. I want to stress that. There's no way it could make sound when she gives it back to him. However, Bo, being a child with a one-track mind, takes the batteries and puts them back in the rocket and takes it with him. As the family walks home, medicine in hand, they look like they're having a pretty lovely day until that rocket toy starts making all kinds of noise. Now this is not quite a jump scare, but to hear such a loud noise after existing in silence for so long was really startling to me. We see part of this scene take place from Regan's point of view, which is something I really love. So we don't hear what's going on, but we just see the horrified looks on her parents' faces as Lee runs to try and reach Bo in time. Unfortunately, he isn't fast enough, and we get our first glimpse of these monsters, which, fun fact, I just read that John Krasinski did the mocap for all of these monsters, and I'm like, why? You had enough to do. You were busy enough. But we see the monsters when one jumps out of the tree line and kills Bo. I am now realizing I've covered 2 movies in a row where the death of a child happens pretty early in the movie's runtime, and I promise it wasn't on purpose, but I'm still very sorry about that. But with the death of the youngest Abbott child, we wrap up our cold open, and what a cold open it was! This brings us to day 472, and I remember audibly gasping in the movie theater when I saw how much time had passed. We see the family going about their day, the kids are doing kid stuff, while Regan notably seems to prefer time to be by herself. We also see that Evelyn is heavily pregnant, which is a great addition because, to my knowledge, 2 things that have the potential to be very loud are the act of giving birth and the baby that comes from that act. And finally, we see Lee is hard at work in the basement trying to use a radio to communicate to the outside world, and also to improve a cochlear implant for Regan. In the basement, we also get to see what is probably the funniest whiteboard of all time. Remember how I said this movie has some of the best examples of show don't tell? Well, then there's also stuff like this that still makes me laugh 3 years later. We do what we must. I really appreciate these early scenes because it allows you to get really familiar and acquainted with the setting that we're in, which comes in handy later when the action really picks up. You don't have to worry about, well, how did they get over here? How does this mechanism work? We already get it. We're done. We also get to see the details of how they've adapted their lives in this world almost 1.5 years into this life-altering event. We see them playing board games with cloth pieces, and we see them eating a dinner of soft, mushy foods without using silverware. It's also at this point that I'm confronted with how quickly I would die in this world, because all of my activities are very loud and all my favorite foods are very crunchy. So this would be no way for me to live. This sequence also features some of the movie's famous jump scares. These jump scares get me like no other, even though they're almost always completely innocuous. They are just so loud coming out of complete silence that there is no way for me to not shit myself every time they happen. Like this lantern getting knocked over, or these raccoons falling from the sky. I did have to rewind a couple of times to get the exact timestamp for when the jump scare happens, and let me tell you, it was miserable every time. The raccoons in particular bring me to one of the issues I have with this movie, which is I truly don't understand the rules. In this situation, we had a loud sound that attracted the monsters, but it took them like a long time to come and get the raccoons. And with Bo, the monsters got him almost instantly. Were they just unfortunately close to Bo at that time, or did they react to different sounds differently? What are the rules? I need my own expository whiteboard. We close out the day with a scene I don't really need to mention because it has pretty much zero impact on the plot at all, but John Krasinski and Emily Blunt slow dance while listening to Harvest Moon on headphones, and I think it's incredibly romantic, and I just wonder if they cried every day on set. But there's a full moon rising. A new day, a new title card. I just love the numbers. I don't know what it is about them. Today, we see Lee continuing trying to improve a cochlear implant for Regan, but when he presents it to her, she wants nothing to do with it. This scene is really incredible. John Krasinski and Millicent Simmons work so incredibly well together. It just makes my heart ache for them. The two of them seem really at odds, and while Lee just wants to help his daughter, she seems fed up with the repeated failed attempts at his improvement of her cochlear implants. She just keeps getting her hopes up only to be disappointed, and she's sick of it. Miscommunication is abound, and it's so unfortunate because the family relationships in this movie are just so real and strong that it makes us care about these characters so much. Later that day, the family splits up, with Lee taking Marcus to go fishing and leaving Regan at home with Evelyn, even though Regan seems to desperately want to go fishing and Marcus seems terrified of going fishing. After they leave, Regan retreats to her room, making one final attempt to see if this cochlear implant will work, and when it doesn't, she packs a few things in a bag and sets out to visit Beau's makeshift grave at the scene of his death, fracturing the family even more. Back with Marcus and Lee, we see the real reason why Lee didn't want Regan to come when he shows Marcus this big, loud, rushing waterfall. When they stand by the waterfall, they can speak at full volume, because as long as they are near something that is louder than them, the monsters won't come and get them. Again, I don't fully understand the rules of this world, because if the waterfall is constantly making noise, wouldn't there be monsters constantly circling the waterfall? Or is it because it's a constant noise, they don't care about it? I need a whiteboard.
You're all right.
Whatever, but the point is Lee wanted to share this place with his son and so that they could speak out loud to each other, and I'm sure he was worried that Regan would feel left out or upset that she couldn't participate in this the same way they can. Marcus and Lee have a heart-to-heart, and Marcus directly asks Lee if he blames Regan for Beau's death, to which he pretty quickly answers no, but he even more quickly answers yes, of course, when Marcus asks him if he still loves Regan.
You should tell her.
And this whole thing just squeezes my heart into mush. The movie bounces between all the characters for a while at this point, so we check in and see Regan still at the grave, and Evelyn is at home doing laundry, where I am obliged to point out the fact that her burlap sack of laundry catches on this nail in the staircase, pulling it up and exposing it. Let's call it Chekhov's exposed nail. Marcus and Lee are on their way home from the waterfall when they pass by this old man and his dead wife. She presumably was killed by one of the monsters, and this man is distraught. So distraught, in fact, that it appears he might start to scream. Even after Lee gives him the universal sign for shut the fuck up, this man screams his little heart out. Lee grabs Marcus and they hide behind a nearby tree, listening in silent horror as they hear this man get ripped apart by a monster. Unsettling! Back at the house, we see Evelyn begin to go into labor, and I personally think giving birth is a scary enough concept without the added factors of being entirely alone and being in a post-apocalyptic hellscape where you cannot make a single noise. Evelyn flips a switch, switching all the lights on the outside of the farm to red, their sort of unspoken signal for it's go time, and she tries to silently make her way into the basement that they have been soundproofing, presumably for this exact event. I will say, I was so into the movie at this point that there's a moment where Evelyn makes a super small sound, and I muted my TV to try and help her, so I was pretty into it. As she is going down the stairs, she steps on Chekhov's exposed nail with her bare foot, and it is something I wish to never see again. Naturally, this causes her to make a sound loud enough that the monsters 100% know she's there. A monster finds its way into the basement, but Evelyn is able to create a diversion using this kitchen timer, and is able to make her way back up the stairs and situate herself in the bathtub to try and have a baby. Lee and Marcus make it back to the farm, and they see the red lights signaling to them what is going on inside. Lee sends Marcus off to shoot off fireworks, which has been their plan to make a sound loud enough to cover up any noise Evelyn might be making. The fireworks shoot off just in time as Evelyn begins uncontrollably screaming, and the fireworks also catch Regan's attention, who begins to run back home. Inside the house, Lee finds no trace of Evelyn at first. He goes upstairs into the bathroom and finds a bloody trail in the bathtub, and pretty immediately accepts the fact that his wife is dead. She's not though, and instead she jump scares him with a bloody hand on the shower window. And I gotta say, for a world where making a noise can instantly lead to your death, This family really loves to jump scare each other. Luckily, this newborn baby is able to not make a sound or cry until they make it to their soundproof basement. And they put him in this little soundproof box with the little tiniest baby oxygen mask I've ever seen. I wish I could have been there on the day one of them just threw their hands up and said, "We'll just put the baby in a box." This also leads us to one of my absolute favorite scenes of the movie, where Evelyn wakes up panicked to realize that their children are wandering around out there somewhere while monsters are circling their house. They have a really beautiful but brief conversation about parenthood, and they arrive at the real thesis of this movie when Evelyn says,
"Who are we if we can't protect them?"
That line can make me cry anytime. This movie just really works on my tear ducts, man. Lee goes out to wrangle the kids, and the audience is able to see that they have found each other through a jump scare, might I add. And they have made their way to the top of this grain silo, but are unable to signal to their dad where they are. Evelyn wakes up again in the basement to find that it is flooding with water and that her little baby in the little baby box is floating away. Like, I know it's not funny at all that her baby is floating away in its box, but it's a little funny that the baby is floating away in a box. Evelyn just can't catch a break today because there's also a monster swimming around in here. She silently wades through the water, and I gotta say, that is Infection City with that foot wound. But she is able to grab the baby box and hide behind this little makeshift waterfall. I gotta say, waterfalls are the real hero of this movie. Back at the grain silo, one of the hatch doors gives way, plummeting Marcus into the grain below, and the sound of this happening lures the monster away from Evelyn in the basement as it races towards Marcus and Regan. The monster rushes past Lee in the field, alerting him to the location of his children, which is good, but at this point his children are drowning in a silo full of grain, which is bad. Marcus and Regan fend off the monster using the hatch door in a scene very reminiscent of the Jurassic Park T-Rex scene. But the monster suddenly stops its pursuit when the feedback noise from Regan's cochlear implant seems to cause it unbearable distress, and it bolts away. The relief of being reunited with their father is very short-lived, however, as a monster descends on them again, and the kids hide in the pickup truck while Lee fights it off with an axe. The monster wounds Lee badly, which causes Marcus to scream, which turns the monster's attention to the children instead. At this point, the line, "Who are we if we can't protect them?" is pounding in my head as Lee turns to Regan and signs, "I love you, I have always loved you," before letting out the longest, saddest scream. I have goosebumps. Can you see? You can't see. Yes, you can. Oh my god. Quickly, the monster turns on Lee and attacks him, and we see the kids watch their dad get torn to pieces in front of them, which is a big nope from me. They release the parking brake on the truck and silently roll their way back down to the house. They retreat to the basement with Evelyn and the baby, and this is Regan's first time being down here, so it's the first time she sees all the experimenting and improving Lee has been trying to do on an implant for her, and I need this movie to cool it with making me cry. The sentimental moment between Regan and Evelyn is cut short when a monster finds its way into the basement. Remembering how it reacted to the feedback from her cochlear implant before, and giving us one more look at my favorite whiteboard, Regan uses the microphone attached to Lee's radio to amplify the sound from her implants, and the monster does not like this. It's fully freaking out. Its armor-like shell begins fracturing outward, exposing some soft, fleshy bits underneath. Quickly, Evelyn shoots at the monster's exposed head and blows it to absolute smithereens. It's a relief that they found a way to definitively kill the monsters, but we better hope it keeps working, because with one look at their CCTV cameras they have set up, we see that there are plenty more where that came from. Evelyn at least seems to be pretty confident, sharing a look with Regan before she cocks her shotgun, and the credits roll. And that's A Quiet Place! It was my first time revisiting that movie in a couple years, and I am delighted to report that that ending still shot me out of my seat. I was pretty amped. In general, too, I think it still holds up pretty well existing outside of the massive hype bubble of when it was released. Sure, there's a lot of logical issues, and I don't understand the rules too well, but I'm not concerning myself with all that. The characters are so good and the story is so emotionally effective for me that I am willing to put all of that out of my mind and just enjoy it for what it is. But what do you think about A Quiet Place? Were you able to enjoy the full immersion experience in a movie theater? Or was there an asshole eating nachos the whole time? Also, let me know if you're looking forward to A Quiet Place 2, which will be coming out this Friday, and I'm looking forward to seeing it very shortly. But until next time, remember, there's nothing to be scared of.
Cochlear implant.
Cochlear implant. You won't make a fool out of me, English language.